All right. So we just want to have a look at some of the considerations and looking more at that assessment process that you might take before you start launching into using a switch with an individual or within the classroom. And there's many more than what I've listed in my thought bubbles up here, but basically there are things like the switch itself. So you would have been out in the exhibit hall and seen a great range of different switches there. I think on the AbleNet stand they had a string switch, and we're all very familiar with the jelly bean switches. We see them a lot in the classrooms. So we've got the jelly bean switch. But depending on the individual and what their physical fine motor skills are, we might be looking at other switches. So this is a pillow switch. Haven't bought a great range, but I've also got the little microlight switch, which is more just using very fine finger movement for access. So, and when you're thinking about the switch itself, there's a whole range of features around the switch, well, the type of switch. So I've talked about pillow, or there's proximity switches where you might just be waving your hand over the switch and not having to actually activate it by touch. There's the robustness of the switch, and if any of you were in the presentation with Christopher Hills yesterday, he mentioned his spec switch and how he gives it a great workout, and he goes through a number of spec switches in a year because he uses it so frequently in creating his video editing snippets. So the robustness is really important. Some people can, depending on where you're accessing and how often. Things like whether you want a wired switch or whether you want a wireless switch. So there's a great range of features, and I'll point you to some assessment type websites that can help you think about those things. The other thing is whether you will need a switch interface if you're using a tablet. So the switch itself can't be plugged into the tablet. You need something to interpret that switch press, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you do need a switch interface, but what type of switch interface? There's quite a range out there now, and some of them do more things than others, so it's good to consider that. And then there's other things around positioning and also mounting the tablet, mounting the switches. And then also, we never want to forget the team approach. So it's not just one person involved in this process, but thinking about the individual and asking them what they prefer and what would be good for them. The family involvement, therapy involvement, the educators and things like that. So all of those things are some of the considerations that you'll need to go through. So I mentioned switch assessment is important, and these are a couple of tools that I've found useful looking on some blog sites, the ACE Centre and also TalkSense. If you're not so familiar with switching, the TalkSense one really goes through even some of the older stuff that we've done in the past in terms of connecting a switch to a computer, so talks through that. And gives you a really good sense of everything about switching, really. And as a speech pathologist, I found that quite helpful to explain some of the terminology and some of the things you need to think about. The ACE Centre gives you, I guess, more of an assessment process and some checklists and things to think about. So as Amanda mentioned, the blog post that I put together, basically the slides are embedded in that. I also have a lot of the links in there, as well as video clips and showing some of the things we're going to demonstrate. So yeah, it should all be there. This is another one of my favourite tools to refer to, and there's a few different variations on this. But basically, how do you get from that initial teaching someone to just understand, hit the switch and something happens, that cause effect, and then move on to something where they're actually using their switch functionally for, perhaps to navigate around a communication app, using two switches, one or two switches. So there's a process for that, and this is something that Linda Burkhart went through 2 years ago at the conference here. She talked about the two stepping stones to switching success. So if you went to lindaburkhart.com, you would find information on that. It's not only just this little list, but she actually goes through and says, these are some activities that you can try, and this is what you're achieving at this step. So it's really quite thorough.